911, what is your emergency? I said, answering on the first ring. It had been a slow day up to that point, but that was all about to change in a moment.
I just saw something bad.
A hysterical voice cried out on the other end of the line.
My neighbor, she's outside, and she's bleeding.
Bleeding from where? I said.
Everywhere,
she screamed. I tried to get her address, but she was so hysterical that she kept yelling for help. Eventually, she calmed down enough to give me her street. Just a reminder. I heard new voices in the background, all shrieking. We have a unit on the way, I said. Just stay on the line with me. It's going to be okay.
No,
she whispered, barely audible over the screaming in the background.
It isn't.
A few minutes later, I was in the break room, getting a coffee and trying to stop my hands from shaking. I was hyperventilating, full of an incomprehensible terror and anxiety that I had never felt on this job before. Before the call had cut out, it sounded like a street full of rabid people had surrounded the caller's house. And then the radio came on from the police unit that had been first to arrive at the scene.
Dispatch, you there? This is Shay.
I heard the voice of Trooper Shay crackling. I immediately picked up on the backup unit that we kept in the break room. This is dispatch, I said. What's going on?
I came down Kansas Street from Union Road, and it's totally empty except for a few bloodstains. Were you able to get the house number of the caller?
He asked. Negative on that, I said. Any broken glass or smashed down doors. It sounded like pure insanity at the end of the call. She claimed she was being attacked by one of her neighbors. Trooper Shay consulted with his partner on the street for a moment before responding.
We just heard screaming and glass shattering. It sounded like it came from number 67 on Kansas Street. Send backup.
I ran back to the main room. We had a new system that could live stream 911 calls directly to the cars of police in the area, as well as live stream audio from the car back to dispatch. I turned it on, entering the number of Trooper Shay's patrol car, and listened intently.
Come out with your hands up,
I heard Shay's partner yell. Shay gasped.
Oh God, she needs medical attention,
he said.
She's got blood coming out of her eyes, her ears, her nose, and she's vomiting. What do you think she has? Ma'am, stop right there,
Trooper Shay yelled.
Don't come any closer.
And then I heard a rash of swearing and yelling followed by a gunshot. I dropped my coffee cup on the floor, hearing it shatter and spread burning hot liquid across my shoes. But I was so engrossed and horrified by what I was hearing that I had barely noticed.
Oh God, she bit me,
Shay's partner said.
She bit my thumb off.
I heard another series of gunshots and then the slamming of car doors.
Go, go, go,
one of them said, and I heard the squealing of tires.
Oh crap, what is that?
Shay said, and then his voice came in over the radio.
Dispatch, this is Shay, and we have a major obstruction blocking the intersection of Kansas and Maine. It looks like... Okay, I know this is going to sound insane, but it looks like a pile of bodies. Literally hundreds of them, stacked on top of each other like firewood. Maybe they're just mannequins, I don't know, but most of them look like they're bleeding. We need backup immediately and emergency medical services as well. Trooper Ingram lost a finger when we got surrounded by a dozen drugged up or sick lunatics back there. One of them bit me on the calf through my uniform, but I don't think that it will require medical attention. They were biting, scratching, and hissing like snakes. There's something wrong here, I'm telling you.
This is dispatch, I said, and backup is on the way. I wanted to tell him to get the heck out of there and drive the other way, but I wasn't a cop. I had no authority to do any such thing. They would likely think it was their primary duty to secure and protect the scene until the other police arrived. My shift was about to end in a few minutes when this insanity began, and my replacement walked in just as I hung up the radio. She looked at me, one eyebrow raised. "You are not going to believe this," I told her, and I briefed her on everything that was happening. Her mouth opened more and more as I recounted the story, her eyes widening in horror. And by the end, I still hadn't heard from Trooper Shea or his backup. I was having anxiety and just wanted to get out of there. My family lived nearby, and if there was some sort of crime spree or pandemic happening, I wanted to be home to protect them. My son was only 7 years old, and I knew that he couldn't protect himself in such an apocalyptic calamity as was occurring in our little town. As she sat down in the dispatcher's chair, another 911 call came in, and I took the opportunity to get my stuff and head out of there. I had only a 5-minute drive back home. My knuckles were white as I sped down the residential streets at 30 miles over the speed limit. Traffic was sparse and I saw nothing out of place. Until I turned onto my street, that is. My neighbor was an elderly man whose 6-year-old granddaughter lived with them. Both of them were standing in the middle of the road, staring up at the sun, their mouths agape. I saw long knives in each of their right hands. I slammed on the brakes a few feet away from them, but they didn't stir. I tried honking my horn, but they just kept staring up at the sky without any awareness. As I looked down from their faces, I realized they were both viciously sawing at their bodies, opening up slice after slice. A waterfall of red began to run down their skin, soaking into the pavement. I barely could keep it down. I backed up, driving on my neighbor's lawn to get around them, putting down the window to yell as I passed by. "What the heck are you doing, Mr. James?" I screamed at him. "Stop it." I wondered whether I should jump out and try to stop them, but with their current mental states, I felt they might be just as liable to stab me as not if I got out. Suddenly, Mr. James' eyes came down, focusing directly on mine, and the knives stopped moving. The little girl grinned at me, waving the soaked knife back and forth, sending droplets of crimson spraying on my car and on her dress. She's telling me to cut myself to let the viruses in," Mr. James said, and his granddaughter stared straight ahead like a doll. It was as if they felt no pain. I saw the tendons and muscles in their legs, their stomach and chest as they stood there, going deeper and faster, wavering like trees in a hurricane. Mr. James fell to the ground, red continuously pouring out of him, and his granddaughter pointed behind me, nearly tripping, her head lolling from side to side as her lips started to turn a light blue, probably from the blood loss and impending physical collapse. "She's here for you too," she said. "She wants to play with you. She wants you to open up and let the viruses slide in. They look for the soft and warm spots. They're so cold. Open it up and let them in, and you'll never be sad again." Slowly I turned, seeing the corpse of a girl standing there next to a tree in my neighbor's backyard. Her skin was bleached white and her mouth was sewn shut, ugly black stitches marring her cyanotic, purplish lips. Her stringy black hair hung down past her shoulders, framing her face as she stared directly at me. Her eyes were milky white, like cataracts, and I saw countless bugs wriggling throughout her body, eating away at the skin of her arms and legs. "Do you feel the wetness of their tongues? The dead ones just want in." Her voice rang out in my head, distorted and demonic and low. Her lips never moved. The corpse girl just continued to stare in my direction. I felt hypnotized sitting there in my car, and then I felt them, cold tongues that drew across my back and chest, The car filled with the smell of sulfur and decay, and then my vision began to turn black as her voice took over my mind and I fell into a dreamless sleep. "Dad?" I felt little hands pushing on my chest. I opened one eye groggily, forgetting where I was for a few moments, and then I shot up in my seat, adrenaline coursing through my body as I looked around for the corpse girl. "She's gone, Dad. I got rid of her. For now." I looked down at him, amazed. "Anthony," I whispered, looking at him. My head throbbed painfully. "How did you get rid of that thing?" I asked. He shrugged. "I can do weird stuff sometimes, like during my birthday party last year." I remembered the birthday party clearly. We had a clown who juggled and cartwheeled and did all sorts of tricks for my son and his friends. My son said that he could juggle too and he wanted to show the clown. He had run into the house and grabbed a few of our knives and started throwing them up in the air. They seemed to slow down as he rose, floating slowly over his head. They fell as if through water, and Anthony grabbed them easily and threw them back up into the air. "How was he doing that?" the clown had asked me, breaking character. I had no idea and simply stood there speechless. And then I yelled his name and the knives had all clattered to the lawn. She was strong and I felt her mind. It was so cold, like an icicle going into my head, but I kept her back by building a wall. He pointed to the backyard where the corpse of the girl had stood. "And kept her there, Dad." I realized that he wasn't talking about a physical wall but some sort of mental wall that he made in his mind. I nodded. "She was trying to take you." I could feel the words that came out of her head and into yours. I heard everything she was saying, and she was showing me things, really bad and really scary things from where she comes from. She told me that in her home, all the roads are paved with bones of kids like myself, and that the girls like her have their mouths sewn shut, so that they never have to rely on using their mouths to speak. They use their brains somehow. The whole place is run by an insane god who lies by this silver stream. She showed me the god and I felt it looking at me. It was like insects were looking at me, like insects with huge brains and big dark and scary eyes. He shuddered. "What kind of god is that, Dad?" "A god we never want to meet, that's for sure," I said, tousling his hair, trying to get him to smile. "The God that we believe in is an eternal love and light. Whatever that little girl worships, it isn't God.